Okay, the button has been pushed.
Good evening. I'm sorry about getting here a little late.
It's all right.
I'm in a practice session, huh? Hi, Rosie.
How you doing, Chris?
Good. How are
Okay.
you?
All right, let me go turn off my phone.
As soon as Will is back, we'll get started with the webinar. Thank you everyone for being here. Yeah.
Sorry about that delay. Hey, Chris, good to see you. Councilmember Jawando, good to see you. Thanks so much for joining. Sorry, Reese, you're probably going over the last of the spiel, so I'll let you.
That's it. We're ready to go live whenever you are, so just let me know.
Cool.
Good evening, Will.
Good evening. Good evening. Good to see you. Good to see you. Okay, cool. Yeah, we can. We're at 7, so let's go ahead and go live and let me just start it up. Well, good evening, as folks are filing in. Welcome. We'll just wait for a second as people sort of come in the virtual door and we get to critical mass, and then we'll begin. As a reminder, we are live and recording on YouTube, and so we ask folks just to be aware of that and to mute yourselves as well. And we'll get started in just a second. Also, reminder to folks to put any questions that you have in the chat, and we'll make sure to get to them as we're going through our discussion and hearing from our panel. So we'll give it just another second. All righty. Happy to go ahead and begin. Well, good evening, folks. I'm William Roberts, the chair of the Montgomery County Renters Alliance, and welcome you in to our monthly town hall for this August. Have a great panel for you this evening to talk about both what's going on here at the county level and with the rent relief program, and talk about some legislative activity that we can expect at the council with regard to renter protections. And so hope that folks are well and safe in these storms, and look forward to having you all here with us and being part of the dialogue. As I said up top, definitely want to get you all involved in the conversation, and so make sure that you're putting your questions in the chat, and we will get to them as we're going through our discussion, and to make sure that the experts that we have here can help answer some of those for you. Up top, just wanted to say to folks, clearly you're with us because you are interested in this issue, probably because you're touched by it, or because you know someone who's touched by it, and we know the things that are going on out there impacting our rental community. Here in Montgomery County, the eviction crisis, really exacerbated by COVID and the pandemic, is hitting hard, and there are lots of families, somewhere between 15 to 30,000 renters that we know are behind on their rent across the state, somewhere around 150,000 across the nation. If you look at some of the numbers that have come out just even today, looking at potentially 11 million nationwide. And so this is a widening and ongoing crisis, where we know lots of renters who are working families and trying to make ends meet, and we're doing so even before COVID, certainly been impacted by the worst of the pandemic. And so, organizations like ours are trying to be, continue to be on the front lines in this fight, helping out families that could be potentially facing evictions. As you all know, or likely know, the Montgomery County Renters Alliance is the only organization here locally that is dedicated to tenant outreach, advocacy, and education. And, our firm belief is that the wrong time to learn about your rights is when you are facing eviction. And so we believe, again, in direct services and outreach to tenants and education, helping tenants to learn about their rights, to organize. And we're also deeply involved in policy discussions about tenant protections and tenant issues. And so trying as hard as we can with our partners who you'll hear from to protect people from the devastation of eviction. And we know that eviction is devastating, and destabilizing, not just to the families, certainly, who are at risk of losing their homes, but it's destabilizing to whole communities and has lots of costs, both social, psychological, financial, that reverberate. And so we're trying to keep communities whole and protect them as much as we can as we are in the midst of this pandemic. And so tonight we have a full slate of folks here to talk to you about what's going on with the local programs, but I will introduce that panel in a second. I want to get first to our special guest, who's at-large council member Will Jawando, who has just been a real champion on these issues, again, even pre-COVID, but certainly throughout the pandemic. I've appreciated your leadership and partnership, Councilmember Jawando, and working on these issues for tenants. And Councilmember Jawando is going to talk to us a little bit about what's going on, in general with the issue, but also talk to us and give us an update on a bill that he's the lead sponsor on that will hopefully address some ongoing renter protection. So with that, Councilmember Jawando, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts, Chair Roberts, and it's good to be with you all this evening, and hope everyone is safe and sound. As I was driving home tonight, it was, we've had a couple of really significant summer storms over the last week, and I think about those whose housing is insecure. The renters who either don't have the right upkeep and the water's leaking through, right? You can have the best house in the roof in this case, and with water like this, the stuff can happen. People who are in threat of eviction and are worried about or have been evicted. It's one of those things I think it's easy to take for granted. When something happens in the elements, we rush home. And for many, as Will Roberts mentioned, for tens of thousands behind on rent, but for many that home is not as stable as we would like, and it's our collective work in the work of the Renters Alliance and the county government and all of us as a community to change that fact. And we've made progress. We have much more to do. So it's good to be with you all tonight. We're 4 days away, absent any change of heart from Larry Hogan, from the eviction moratorium ending on Sunday, which obviously we have some federal action thanks to Cori Bush and others who sat outside for days and enforced congressional action and enforced the CDC to extend the moratorium. And I'm sure you'll talk about that later and where we are in relation to qualifying for that. But we know even with that, there are going to be people who fall through the cracks, who can't navigate the system, who aren't able to meet the requirements, or just getting further and further behind on their rent. Obviously, I would urge the governor to extend this moratorium here to provide extra protection for Maryland families, but it seems that he signaled that that's very unlikely to happen. He thinks COVID is over, despite the fact that we are in significant transmission here in the county, and the Delta variant continues to rise. And we've just last week reinstated a indoor mask mandate as the Board of Health. For some reason, the governor's living in a different world where COVID is over. and the effects of it are over. But we know that that's not the case. So the bill that I've introduced and what we're trying to do locally to provide as much protection as possible. I'm glad to see Ms. Harris and Ms. McCrae here, who are doing great jobs on both ends of the spectrum, trying to get money out the door to support people and keep them in their homes, and then trying to make sure that those that are in their homes have access and can talk to people if there is something wrong with their unit, and that they get the support and get DHCA out there as well as the many other things that they do. But I have a bill that, if you remember, we introduced a rent stabilization and passed last April, rent stabilization during emergencies, and to provide a short-term relief for folks who were having trouble paying their rent due to the COVID emergency and the fallout and the reduced income. The goal of that legislation, the way it was drafted, was that it would hold rents at a stable rate. I introduced it at 0%. It ended up being 2.6%, or the voluntary rent guidelines, and that it would hold that through until we could get to the other side of the pandemic. So the way the legislation was passed, it was 20 days after the state of emergency. That shot clock, so to speak, will start now on Monday, and notices will be able to be sent out for increases after that period of time passes, unless we pass this new legislation that I've introduced, which would extend that earlier bill, that legislation, to hold rents at the voluntary rent guidelines, which are currently 1.4%, hold it there for a year. We know, if we look at the 2008 recession, and I saw it up close and personal, working in the Obama White House at the time, when we were losing 800,000 jobs a month as the economy fell out from under us. And we had to do what at that time was the largest and most direct federal aid stimulus, just almost $800 billion since the Great Depression era, to try to save the economy. What we saw in those last 14 years since then is that the tail on the recession, we're still feeling the effects from it. And that even when we get out of the immediate emergency we're in, and we're going to have people who are struggling to dig out for a long time. And the last thing we want to do is to pile on late fees and to pile on the risk and threat of eviction for non-payment of rent onto that mix, because there are going to be some people who are already recovering really well. Those of us who sit in our rooms and our offices like me and collect a paycheck and do Zoom and save money on gas, right? But then we have many other people who aren't in that situation, who have been working all the way through, have been risking their health and safety, some who have lost jobs. And so we really want to provide as much of an ease transition back as possible. And I think the bill as introduced, which would keep the ability to increase rents up to the voluntary guidelines, but it would just prevent the gouging that we're worried about, because we have a constricted housing supply, because people still want to move to Montgomery County, because it's a great place. We want to make sure that we are protecting people in their homes, renters, as much as possible. So it's really important that we support this bill, because right now, unlike the first bill, which I didn't know how it was going to go, I'm not sure how this one's going to go. I think that there is a sense that we're on the other side of this, and the CDC moratorium is enough, and go down the list. And we know that that's not the case in this room here, in this virtual room. But we need to make our voices heard. We have a public hearing on this bill that I've introduced, Bill 3021, which would again extend the emergency stabilization of rent increases at the voluntary rent guidelines for a year after the state of emergency. So at this point, it would be till August 15th of 2022. That would be the earliest anyone could issue a notice of rent increase. That will have a public hearing on September 14th when we come back in session, Tuesday, September 14th. And we're working on putting an event together to, raise the profile of this issue, working with the Renters Alliance and other groups. I know this is something that a large coalition of groups wrote to us saying, please extend this. You know, we need to do many things. We need to get more money out the door. We need to have help at the courthouse. We need to extend the eviction moratorium. There's a whole set of things we need to do, but this is certainly a piece of the puzzle that needs to happen to provide long-term stability. So I would hope that the Renters Alliance and you as individuals would write in to the council, write into the and let us know. Sign up to testify if you have time on the 14th, and we're going to be trying to really raise awareness about this so that Rosie and her team can keep those rents low and those increases in a reasonable rate, so that we can help keep people in their homes. So much more to do, but this is an important piece of the puzzle that I wanted to come on tonight and just let you know. In about a month, we're going to have this hearing, and so we need to build support, and people need to know why this is important in the lives of so many renters across our county here in Montgomery County. So appreciate the opportunity to come by and bring that up. And if there's time, I'm happy to take questions, but I probably went a little longer than I should. So appreciate it.
Well, we certainly appreciate it, and appreciate all the work you've been doing on this issue, council member. As you said, the Renters Alliance is happy to be one of those groups that have been, working with you, pushing, as you said, not just for this new legislation to extend that window, but we were proud to work with you on the first one. And frankly, we were proud to work with you at 0%, and I think that I wouldn't be speaking out of school to say we were pretty frustrated to see even in the beginning of the pandemic, right, where we weren't at the point of having a vaccine and there were so many uncertainties that we couldn't keep the original legislation that you had introduced the last time. And so, as you said, the codifying the voluntary rent guidelines and giving them teeth is certainly important and something that people have talked about in the county for a long time. But there was certainly urgency last year when you put forth the first bill, and there's urgency now, as you talked about with the second one. So we're really happy to work with you on that. And you mentioned, if I can, you mentioned sort of some uncertainty about knowing where, not so much about knowing where your colleagues are, but about knowing, what the fate of this current legislation will be, whether there are, tweaks and pulls that will be added to it at the council level. Can you sort of speak a little bit more to that? Because I think for people, at least I would imagine a lot of people listening to you might be surprised to learn that there are, folks who don't see this as a clear-cut issue, about, as you said, stability and preventing gouging. So can you speak a little bit more to, sort of what the disconnect might be, or what people need to be talking to our elected officials about? Because clearly there would be a disconnect if folks in the decision-making chairs aren't understanding what's happening in people's lives.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I failed to mention another thing the bill does. It also would prevent the accrual of late fees during that same period, which, Ms. Harris knows as her teams are processing these rent arrears. It just makes no sense to me that we would allow the layering on of further fees when people are trying to dig out. It just is, it's antithetical to the whole goal of keeping people stable in their homes. We tried to pass a rent-free, a late fee amendment to the original bill. Unfortunately, it failed. And neighboring jurisdictions that aren't deemed as progressive as Montgomery County actually did prevent late fee accrual. So I don't know why, but I'm hopeful that this bill will do that as well. I just think that to the extent that there's a disconnect, there's a feeling that, we need to get, and I understand the feeling of wanting to get past COVID, right? We all want it to be over. We want to move on. We want to rebound. We want the economy to rebound. We want people to be healthy. And so I think there's some sense that, as wanting the economy to rebound, there's some disconnected relationship in the mind of some, that if you create stability for renters in the form of a understandable, reasonable rent increase, that somehow that's going to create a negative business climate. It's just not, it's not proven. It's not, I don't think it's based in reality really. Because if you look at the vast majority of renters, of landlords and property owners, most of them are increasing within the rent guidelines. And so, and again, this isn't an emergency. This is as people are recovering. We're trying to keep the, almost half of our county that rents stable. And so I just think I think that really is the issue for some, and that there are other mechanisms to protect, right? Like that we have the CDC, which we didn't have a week ago, right? We just, that's new. And that maybe Hogan will extend. That's not going to happen now. We know that. And then I think with the Delta variant raging, I think this is even more clear cut in my mind than it was even a month ago when I introduced the legislation. It still would have been needed. So I'm hopeful that we can, convince and have the dialogue. But I don't think it's a foregone conclusion. I don't think it's a slam dunk that we have the support right now. Again, when I introduced this, no one else co-sponsored it. So, and that happened the first time too, and then it got a 9-0 vote. So it shows you that you can, advocacy matters. And so I think those are probably the two things, that there's other protections and there's some sort of business climate issue, but again, which are not what we're doing here. This is about keeping people stable, allowing for responsible increases, and not adding on more pressure to people who have already been squeezed. The other thing I'll say, last thing on this, is I think there's been some desire maybe to have it be income restricted to who gets the relief. Again, I think that's something I'm going to be leaning on Ms. Harris and Ms. And others to talk to and get expertise, because that sounds good, but if you make $60,000 a year and your rent goes up, $500, and the cutoff is if you make 50,000, I'm just throwing numbers out there.
Right.
That I don't think we want that person to be gouged either. And we don't know everyone's situation. And I just think we get in a dangerous position, which is why I didn't put that in the initial legislation. So those would be some of the things I think that are on the horizon. There's always things curveballs that come, but that's my best guess on where we are.
I appreciate that. And I think the point you made is apt as you started to analogize this to the recovery from the Great Recession, and that, you don't want to end up in a scenario where we're creating two systems, where there are only certain people who would be protected, but other folks would be open to being gouged as we are sort of recovering in the tail of this. There's a lot of agreement with you in the chat, certainly about the issue in particular, but about late fees and add-ons, and a question in particular, which folks are really interested in how we can create sort of a receptive legislative climate for additional protections against late fees and payments of that type. For our part, I'm curious, what you think. You probably think the same, but for our part, it's always been our experience that you help to create a climate for these kind of things by communicating with the council, right? Telling people your stories, telling people what's going on actually in your lives. As you mentioned, council member, this is a real deal for almost half of our community here in the county. And so making sure that this can't be distilled down to a conversation just about numbers, but it's about people's lives and about how you are being impacted right now, as you said, with the compounding crises, and with Delta that wasn't even in the at crisis mode when you introduced this. And so this is something we're definitely going to be not just watching closely, but continuing to advocate on. Frank, I think, helpfully put in the chat the link. There's a question about how you can sign up to testify, and there's a link to the chat that Frank put in. Thanks, Frank. To the council calendar where you can sign up, I believe, after the 19th to sign up for that September 14th public hearing, which looks like is scheduled for 1:30 in the afternoon. So we'll definitely be paying attention to that. and sharing with folks ways that they can come out and let their voices be heard, because this is an important issue, and it's something going on right now. And as you said, council member, it is interesting to see what other jurisdictions are able to pass that don't claim the same progressive mantle that our county does. And certainly we know the county, there's a lot going on. The council is certainly trying to throw the arsenal at it to help people out. But, you know, this is one of those issues where it is really important to see where you know, our legislative branch comes out and where our county government can stand. So,
well,
really
I
appreciate
just
your work there.
briefly, you know, one of the things I say to small landlords and any landlord, like, we're working really hard, you know, 70 million plus, you know, to get money in the hands of property owners and landlords so that people can stay current. I mean, and I know Ms. Harris will talk about that. So this isn't an either or. We're full court press on getting us aid, the federal aid that we received, and our own money out to you know, to protect people and keep them in their homes. But we've also got to make sure that we have the proper protections, and it's a both and, not an either or. And so and remember, this still allows for increases, right?
Right.
You know,
That's most important.
you know, I think people forget that. You know, people see that, you know, this still allows for a reasonable increase based on inflation and the consumer price index. So I think it's very, very reasonable. It's also it's landlord friendly, and it's tenant friendly, in the sense that it tries to take everything into account, and we all have an interest in keeping people stable in their homes, right?
Most definitely.
So anyway,
Most
yeah,
definitely.
and more to talk about too. You know, I have a bill to prevent rent gouging near transit, where it's most prevalent all the time. We need to, you know, that'll be coming up again in the fall, winter, as well, as we consider the Thrive process and missing middle housing and the like. So we've got more to do, obviously, longer term. Speaking of this tail, to keep people, you know, safe in their homes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I don't want to keep you, but since you mentioned it, and we'd love to have you back to talk more about this, but just on the point, the 2 points that you made, our perspective has always been that, you know, on the aid and subsidy end of the scale, that, you know, tenant subsidies are landlord subsidies. You know, this, as you said, this is not an either or. You know, it's not a binary choice. We're trying to, you know, by keeping tenants in their homes, it keeps landlords operational, certainly. But on the gouging issue that you mentioned, you know, I'm reminded of some of the conversations that we had last year, around your bill, where there were some voices in the county who seemed to think that this rent gouging issue was sort of pulled from thin air, that it wasn't actually occurring. And I can remember reading some non-fact-based attacks on the bill, frankly. And we had some conversations with folks to educate them about what we were hearing from tenants. And so this is a thing that's going on. It's not, you know, no one is sort of painting with a broad brush and saying this is most landlords or anything like that, but this is a real thing that is happening. And so this bill is, you know, not a solution in search of a problem. It is a solution to a real problem out there. Yeah.
Well, I tell people all the time, anytime you're big as we are, as far as Montgomery County, 1.1 million plus people, even if you have, you know, 10% of something happening, you know, that's impacting 100,000 people. If you have 5%, you know, it's 50,000 people. And you shouldn't have to justify it that way, but it's important if it protects 10 people. But in this case, you know, we're a huge county, again, with almost half of our county being renters. You know, do the math. That's, you know, 450,000 people that are living in rental units, you know, give or take. Rosie will correct me later, but there's no way. That's why you need a protection. If you're doing the right thing, this doesn't impact you. It impacts the people who aren't, you know, and provides protection for those who are vulnerable. So it's a good point. But the stories, to your point, and if you can't sign up to testify on September 14th at 1:30 p.m., which I know is an inconvenient time for many, you can write all the council members. I'll put in the emails or the way to email us. You can also submit testimony, you know, through video or written testimony ahead of the session, so you don't have to show up and sign up. It's obviously helpful if you can do it, because the stories and putting a face to what's really happening is important. But there's other ways to engage us as well. Twitter is actually, it's one of the great uses of Twitter. If you actually would tag us and say, people are hypersensitive to that. And I think it's actually a better way sometimes than emailing, and to get people's attention. So we'll put that in the chat so you know how to, because you should be able to engage however you feel. You should be able to get to us and tell us how you feel.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Councilmember Jawando. Really, really appreciate your time here, and look forward to the work ahead.
Thank you guys for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I'm going to before we move into the next portion of our program, where we turn it over to our friends from Department of Health and Human Services and DHCA. I will introduce those folks for you. The folks, the other folks that you see on your screen, who will be kicking off the second part of the discussion. I should have started, and I'm sorry, Reese, started by introducing my colleague, my two colleagues from the Renters Alliance who are here with us, Reese Murphy, who's our outreach coordinator. Hi, Reese. Chris Perry, who's the vice chair of our board. Hey there, Chris.
Hi.
And then we have with us as our guest, in addition to Councilmember Jawando, Frank DeMurray, the Deputy Director of the Department of Housing and Community Affairs. Hey, Frank. Rosie McCray Moody was the manager of the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs. And I have to say, one of my former, I'll call you one of my former bosses, Rosie. I was a member of the Landlord Tenant Commission years ago, and Rosie was all of our boss. So great to see you. And also Amanda Harris was the Chief of Services to End and Prevent Homelessness over at HHS. Great to see you all. So I'm gonna turn now. Thank you, Councilmember Jawando. Folks are seeing put into the chat how you can email the council members individually through that link, and we posted, and we will repost those in the chat and in our newsletters to come as well. But definitely really important for folks to be engaged in these public civic conversations that really matter to the renter community. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our friends to talk to us about the rent relief program, give us a little bit of overview and some status updates about both the application process, and also answer some of the great questions that you all are putting in the chat. So continue to do that. And with that, Frank, I think I'll turn it over to you. Oh, there you go.
So actually, I think as our focus for most of our attendees is going to be on the rental assistance program, rental assistance availability. We'll start off with Amanda Harris giving us an update on the county's efforts to get that money, applications processed and rents paid. So
totally, yes. Amanda.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. And thank you so much to the Renters Alliance for inviting me here to talk about the program. I will start out just giving like high level updates. So we have, as of today, distributed over $32 million in rental assistance to more than 5,800 households in the county. We have a total of, well, altogether with all the funding pots, we have $119 million available for rental assistance. So even though $32 million seems like a lot, there is still plenty more funds available. So we strongly encourage you to apply if you have not done so. We are absolutely still, oh, I'm so sorry about the dog. She will stop in a minute, I think. We're definitely still accepting applications. I'll put the link in the chat box, but it's mc311.com/rent relief, and that will take you to the online application portal. If you have some issues with, you don't have internet access, or maybe you have some language or literacy issues, you can call 311 and someone will help you complete the application over the phone. We really want to try and make this as accessible as possible. There are also our partner agencies, which Frank and Rosie can talk about, that are available to assist as well. I'm so sorry. Stop. And what else do I want to say? So basic eligibility criteria, Montgomery County residents, you do need to demonstrate that you have a COVID-related income loss. We're pretty flexible about that. So you just have to make some connection. That could be your job was shut down due to the pandemic. You had to reduce your hours because you had to take care of your kids that weren't able to go to school. You contracted COVID. Unfortunately, some people have lost family members due to COVID. That would definitely count as a COVID-related income loss. So, you know, our goal in all of this is to try to make you eligible, not to deny you. So even if you're not sure and you're questioning, like, maybe I am, maybe I'm not, please apply and we will help you figure it out. You do also need to owe at least $1,000 in rent, so be $1,000 behind. And then your income needs to be at 50% AMI or below. I imagine that many of you may have already applied. We are working around the clock to try and get to you as quickly as possible, but we have received, as of today, more than 7,300 applications. So even though we have a lot of people working on this, it is taking us some time to work through that process. And we are prioritizing those households that are scheduled for an eviction or have a court notice, because we don't want people to end up on the streets. So if you have applied and you have gotten a red and white or a notice on your door, please, please, please reach out to us and let us know so that we can prioritize your application. I will also note that our partner agencies they have the list of people that have been scheduled for an eviction, and they're knocking on doors, and they're not trying to kick you out. So don't be scared. Please answer the door. We're here to help, and we want to get you the money that you need and the landlords the money that you need so that you're able to stay in your home. I probably have more to say, but I'll pause there and see if there are any questions.
Absolutely. I think Reese does have a couple of these culled from the participants free. Go ahead, Reese.
Yeah, so we have a couple of questions just coming in through the Q&A channel. So people feel free to drop those questions in there as we continue to move along. One of the questions was just about the process of checking in on the status of applications. One particular person was just concerned that if there are any issues with their application or anything that comes up, is there any way that they can reach out to HHS and let them know things perhaps have changed with regards to the application, or there might be information on there that's either no longer accurate or wasn't accurate when it was entered or anything like that. And they were also just wondering, are those being manually reviewed, and are they flexible in terms of updating them and making sure they're all current?
Yeah, those are great questions. So you can communicate to us that you have a change in status in a couple different ways. So on the application portal, there is a section on every page that says need to reach us. So you can click on that, and that will send a message directly to our team. You can also call 311, and then you can also email us at hss@montgomerycountymd.gov. And I'll put that in the chat so that you have that as well. I think the important thing to know is, I know there's a lot of anxiety around this, and it can be incredibly frustrating to check your status and see that it hasn't changed. But the important thing to know is, as long as it does not say denied, we got you. Like, you're still in the queue. We're still going to help you. There's plenty of money available. So I can tell you, don't worry. I know you're going to worry, but please know that we will get to you. We will absolutely get to you. I hope that answered the question.
Definitely, I think it did, yeah.
Okay.
One other question that we had was just in regards to something that you touched on, which was how to demonstrate the impact of COVID-19 on an individual's income and otherwise their living arrangements. So one person was just wondering if how HHS was documenting self-attesting the impact of COVID on their circumstances and how that relates to their eligibility for rent relief.
Sure. So on the application, you check some boxes. We ask some questions. Did you have a reduction in hours? Did you lose your job, et cetera? And then there's a line in there to give a brief description. We don't need a lot. We just need to see some sort of connection between your income loss and the pandemic. So, it could be as simple as I was working as a server in a restaurant, and because of the pandemic, my hours were severely reduced and I didn't have enough money to pay rent. That would suffice. For other people, the other way we can look at this, if you are currently receiving unemployment benefits and you can show us some sort of documentation, that's all we need. If you are receiving unemployment, we don't need any additional COVID-related incomes or impact statement. If we don't get the description in the application, your caseworker will probably send you a form that just asks you some questions, and then you just sign off of it. You can just handwrite a note and send it to us. You can send us an email. I mean, anything. We just need to see some sort of direct or indirect connection to COVID.
Got it. And I think we just have one more. One question just about the sharing of information with judges. One person is wondering if HSS is sharing ERA application information with judges, and are there any programs in place that will directly impact people who have pending eviction notices, and are there applications being factored into whether or not they have an eviction executed on them within the ban?
That's a great question. And we would love to get to that place. At this point, the information that we are receiving is from the sheriff's office. So we are only getting information on households that have a scheduled eviction. So we are not getting information from the courts about who's been scheduled. If a judgment has been placed, it's only once it gets to that next phase. And we are not at this point able, or courts aren't willing to accept information from us in any kind of bulk form. We do have staff available on site at the courthouse. So important thing is always to show up. If you get a court notice, it's really, really important that you show up, and we will have staff available there. And, we could give you something in the moment that says that you have applied. We could also help you to apply if you have yet to do so.
Great, thanks so much. Now, Frank, I did not mean to leapfrog you earlier, Amanda, but now, Frank, I'll turn it back over to you and Rosie to talk eviction protections and renters' rights.
Okay, yeah, and we're all a team here, Will, and I very much want to thank everybody that's attending tonight, all of our residents. As was mentioned earlier, everyone involved in this effort understands the urgency and understands the challenges, the anxiety that comes with making application, waiting for funds, trying to understand application. And so I'm with the Department of Housing Community Affairs, together with Rosie McCray Moody and our Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs, and then working with Amanda and her teams, trying to support everyone through this. The core message that we want to keep sending is that you're not alone, in that the resources from the county are available to help, as well as from organizations. Renters Alliance is a partner with the county, together with other organizations that you can contact. They will help you in understanding the resources and the funds and the process. They'll help you in making application. They'll also help you understanding the protections that are available through the courts and the process that the landlord tenant law provides for you and the landlord to work together, but particularly to address how and when and in what structure any kind of eviction activity can happen. So those organizations are available, information about them and their phone numbers. Montgomery County has a main website, montgomerykountymd.gov. If you put in /renters, RENTERS, that'll take you to a landing page, which has a lot of this information that we're going to be talking about tonight. At any time, you can call 311 to try and reach the county resources with the Health and Human Services or with Department of Housing Community Affairs. The websites I just have a lot more information. So again, Montgomery County MD.gov/renters, and we'll put that in the chat. For the key protection that's available to a tenant today to delay eviction is the CDC order. This is the Center for Disease Controls. It was initiated last year in the fall. It initially was to expire at the end of 2020. It was pushed out all the way to June 30th, and then July 31st, and then the order expired. And on August 1st, the protections were relaxed. On August 3rd, the federal government announced a new and slightly different version of the protective order, and they tied it specifically to counties, jurisdictions at the county level that met certain COVID case number transmission rate numbers. Montgomery County became covered by that on August 5. So as of today, anyone in the county who has a failure to pay rent case that goes to court, if you get a summons that your landlord is suing you and you're scheduled to go to court, the number one thing that we tell all tenants who receive a court summons is to make room in your schedule, do everything you can to show up on your court date at that time. The county is supporting, and there is available at the court 10 support legal assistance, Maryland Legal Aid, the CASA organization, and a group called Homeless Persons Representation Project, but they're free legal representation, legal advice resources at the court. And these staff will help you understand your rights. And the number one option, if you are being charged with not paying your rent, is that if you've had a loss of income due to COVID, and you can make representation of that on a form that goes with this protection. It's called a declaration, the CDC Declaration. We'll put the link in the chat as well on what that is. It's also available at the Montgomery County renters site. If you fill that form out and you deliver it to your landlord, and we recommend you do it as soon as you can, but you can actually do it the day of the court hearing. If you present that and the judge accepts that as a defense, that you have had COVID losses, the judge can issue a judgment against you, find in favor of the landlord, say you owe the money to the landlord, but put a pause, and they will not enforce that judgment, that eviction order, until after the expiration of the federal protection. But the number one thing is it's not an automatic moratorium. So that if you do not complete the declaration and you do not qualify that you've lost income, that your income was impacted by COVID, and you've made efforts to apply for rental assistance, and that your income has to be below $99,000 a year, but you need to fill that form out, give it to your landlord. If you don't do that, there's no protection. If you don't show up in court and tell the judge that you've done that, the judge won't know it, and they'll issue a judgment against you. So it's a two-step process to complete the form, give it to the landlord, and then to show up in court and represent to the judge that you've provided that. That will delay until right now, the order says October 3rd. So it was a 60-day delay from August 3rd to October 3rd. There is a chance that a federal judge court could determine that the government was not allowed to put this in place. The landlord community has sued under the previous orders that went all the way to the Supreme Court. This is a new and different order, so it actually none of those cases directly apply, and they have to go back through the courts. But there's a risk that this could end earlier than that. But the key is you can get protection. The process Amanda was speaking to, the process for your application for rental assistance, this is to buy time, and the federal government was very clear that what they were trying to do here was create a window of time for more of this rent assistance to help you pay back rent, anyone that's behind on rent and being sued for eviction. So this is a process that's important. It will buy time. And even after the judge issues a judgment against you, and if the CDC order expires, or if you're not protected by it, there is a process, and we'll speak a little bit to that, that there is time before the sheriff shows up. So even when they issue you the notice, the final notice, the red and white that's posted on the door that says the sheriff has it started the process for eviction. From the day that's posted, it's many weeks before an eviction can occur, just because of the workload and the timing. So there's time, again, to try and take advantage of that window and work with the rental assistance. And as was mentioned, anyone that has a court action against them needs to make sure that your rental application has been updated for that you notify your case manager if you've been assigned, or you notify the email address that was mentioned. And because every effort will be made, if you're eligible for rental assistance, to try and get that processed and paid before an actual event of eviction. So the CDC federal eviction moratorium is available. You need to take action to take advantage of it. And there are resources, free resources to help you do that. There's a separate protection that I'll mention, but it's almost no longer applicable. The state of Maryland, the governor's order had extended until August 15, the same type of protection if you went to court, demonstrated in court. In Maryland only, this is, each state had a slightly different version if they had one, that you had lost income, but it required that you produce physical documentation from an employer and pay stubs and income statements and present that to the judge. The CDC protection is completing a declaration without supporting documents. But if you did process and did get a deferred judgment, a delay in the eviction order under the governor's protection, it does not automatically get protected under the CDC order. You can still deliver to your landlord the declaration, but the governor's order will expire on the 15th, and the courts can begin issuing the writs or eviction notices to tenants who were protected previously under the governor's order starting on the 16th of August. It's still going to require a hearing after that and a process. So you will not get a sheriff showing up at your door on August 16 with an order to vacate the premises under sheriff's orders. And you only vacate with the sheriff's presence and through a court order, not just because your landlord asks you to. But there will be a process where they will offer you a hearing on the protections if you had them under the governor's order. And then if they still find against you, then it will be scheduling. And again, the scheduling is out many weeks in the future. So two protections: the governor's state of Maryland protection is expiring. The federal protection is continuing. And we strongly encourage everyone to learn about that. If you don't wait for your court date, as was mentioned earlier, you don't want to find out in court what your rights are. There are resources available, organizations to help explain it to you. And there's a process that you can file that protection under the federal order in advance. You don't have to wait for court. But if you don't do it in advance, you actually can do it at court and still get the protections. So we wanted to just, as best we can, clarify that. It's very confusing, and it's been expiring and not expiring, and it's still subject to possible cancellation. It's actually tied to whether or not the COVID case numbers go down between now and October 3rd. But the number one thing is just to process the paperwork and show up in court and seek delays while you're working on getting rental assistance. So I just want to close on that. And Rosie McCrae Moody with our Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs will talk a little bit more about the overall process on how the eviction process works and your rights as tenants in this time period.
Okay. Most things have been covered, but I want to reiterate: if your landlord gives you notice to vacate, that's not an eviction. It's just a notice to vacate. He's asking you to leave. You can hold over, and they have to take you to court to have an eviction. An eviction has to be issued by the court and it can only take place in the presence of the sheriff. So don't get scared because he gave you a notice to vacate. You can only be evicted through court order. If you get a notice to come to court for failure to pay rent, I'm going to be the next person to tell you, please, please, please go to court, because to enforce all your rights, you need to show up, you know, and as Frank and Amanda have said, legal aid is always there. CASA has a lawyer there. That what is it? Homeless Prevention Project is there, and the District Court Self-Help Center now has an attorney on duty in the courthouse to help you with advice. So please, please go to court. People are there to help you. Everybody wants to prevent evictions in Montgomery County. So, but we can't do it without your help. So please do all you can to access the available funds. And in terms of rent increases, Jawando's bill is still in effect. Rent cannot be raised more than the voluntary rent guideline issued by the county, which is 1.4%. And even though the protection, well, the moratorium expires on August the 15th, but the state of emergency is not over. And the current law stays in effect until Governor Hogan gets rid of the state of emergency, period. So the state of emergency is still in effect. So the 1.4% is still in effect. What else did I want to tell you? People are calling. We're getting a lot of 311 calls saying, I got a denial letter. What do I do from HHS? A lot of times, and I can ask Amanda to address this, they only send you that letter and it's on there. They haven't been able to contact you. Please pay attention. If you get a call, answer it. They're trying to get information from you so they can complete your application. So if you get that letter, it doesn't necessarily mean you're not going to get help. It just means it probably just means they were unable to contact you. Please call back. There's information on the letter of who to get in contact with. Please go back and contact that person. We had like 3 of them today, and we forwarded them to HHS, and we told the people, please contact HHS, because that's what's going on. They're not able to contact you, and if they can't get in contact with you, they can't finish your application, and so you can't get assistance. So I urge you, please, if your phone rings or if you get an email, answer it. Get your information in so that help them help you. And I think right now that's all I have to say. And Amanda can address it. I see her over there nod. She can tell you the same thing.
Sure,
Yeah,
sure.
Amanda, did you want to? Yeah, please.
Sure. Yeah, sure, Rosie, that's absolutely right. The denial is largely, most times, it's because we have not been able to reach people. There may be a reason that we denied, but we recognize that many people applied back in April or May, and their circumstances may have changed. And so it's not a forever denial. If things have changed, or maybe at the time that you applied, you didn't owe any rent, but now you do, now you're 2 months behind, we will certainly reopen your application. And we really do want to help. I know sometimes in government programs, it feels like there's a lot of effort to make people ineligible. That's not what we're trying to do here. We want to get the money into your hands and into the landlord's hands. Like we want to be able to help. So please reach out to us, answer your phone, answer your email, answer your text, whatever method you have of communicating. We do need to talk to you before we can cut a check. We can't just do it off the information that we have in the application.
And one more thing, we get a lot of calls because the cases are going back up. We get a lot of calls about code enforcement being able to come in, or your landlord being able to come in to repair. Code enforcement is still going out. It's now going out. It's going into people's units, doing inspections. If code says something is broken, or you call in and say something is broken, if the landlord contacts you and says maintenance is coming tomorrow at 3, you need to let them in. You can ask what kind of protections they're using, what kind of PPEs. Are they going to be wearing masks? Are they going to be wearing booties? Whatever. But you do need to let them in, because you can't say my sink is leaking and then tell the repairman, well, I'm not gonna let you in my house to fix it. Because then code is powerless. They can't do anything. They have to close your case because you haven't followed through. You know, you can't have it both ways. So, you know, Frank, is there anything else you want to say about code enforcement?
I did want to cover, during the COVID period, pandemic period, we've had to adjust our property inspections. But the number one thing is our landlord tenant affairs office and our code enforcement offices have been open. People have been working from home. We are, though, now back in the office. So the Montgomery County Department of Housing has an open office for folks that want to come. We prefer that we do things by telephone. We can, based on the year we did that, we find it can be very, very efficient for everyone. But if you have any safety code related issue, property code issues that are important that you need addressed, you do call 311 and you register a complaint. And there's a process that they will connect you with, and someone will get back to you. We'll establish a complaint and we'll track it. During the COVID period, we were not doing interior responses unless it was health and safety urgent. We are performing interior inspections and code responses. And it's, again, as was just mentioned, based on your comfort and your willingness to have someone come into your home. We are actually also starting and getting back on track with our regular scheduled inspections of all units in the county. The county has a troubled property approach to inspections. A couple of years ago, we effectively performed 100% inspection of the multifamily properties in the county. We determined which ones had significant numbers of violations and were deemed troubled properties that needed to be inspected annually. Those with more modest violations were deemed to only need inspections every 2 or 3 years. But we did not do the regular scheduled annual inspections last year due to safety issues, and are restarting that. But we'll be doing that in based on a tenant's comfort. There'll be contact and the scheduling to do the inspections. And if a tenant asks that it not be done, we'll be honoring that. But we will be responding to issues. We recognize, there are a lot of issues that have been addressed virtually, and anything that needs to be addressed in person, please contact the Department of Housing and Community Affairs through the 311 call and register the specifics. And similar to anything you are concerned about on your landlord tenant affairs, issues having to do with your lease or anything related to your rights as a tenant, you start with a 311. There is email addresses to contact, but the 311 process will connect you with our staff, and they'll follow up and they'll work with you and establish whether or not a complaint is what you need to file, and they'll work with you to ensure you do a complaint and that we schedule it and work with you and your landlord on either your lease and tenant rights or on anything having to do with the physical property issues.
Fantastic. So we do have a couple of questions. Thank you both for that information. A couple of questions in the chat. I think a lot of them, I think Frank very helpfully answered in a couple of bites that he put in the chat here that will also be in our newsletter. I think it's in our newsletter already, about where you can go to find out more information about what Frank was detailing in terms of the eviction protections, numbers to support, and sorry, I can't speak this evening, numbers to organizations where they can help you out and give you support in sort of navigating some of this. With contact information, there's a link to the CDC Declaration form that Frank was talking about, where that you can sign in to give your landlords to start that process for the CDC protection, and details on the eligibility for both the CDC order and the governor's order. And all that can be found at Montgomery montgomerykountymd.gov/renters. So montgomerykountymd.gov/renters is where you can go to get those specifics in writing that Frank ably detailed for us a moment ago, as well. The information about what you can do if you receive a court summons. I will reiterate what you've heard. The sort of top line message that you heard certainly from Frank and Rosie, something that we say all the time at the Renters Alliance. If you get a summons, you need to go to court, because although we do believe, learning about your rights it's the worst place to learn about your rights for the first time is when you happen to be in eviction court, and we're all here trying to work to keep people out of eviction court. But if you get a summons, you have to go to court, because as Rosie said aptly, that's where you can enforce your rights. That's where the enforcement of your rights can take place. And if you don't go, that's where you start to lose those abilities to assert those rights. And so it's really, really important. I know it can be a scary process for sure, but if you get a summons, most definitely should go to court. There are a couple of questions though that aren't about rental protections in here, and so I just wanted to make sure I lifted those up. I've lost it now, but I know there was a question, Frank, as you were talking about code issues. Someone was asking a question. Here it is, about what's the best way to handle folks not wearing masks in common areas of apartment buildings. And I know rules have changed about that again in the county as well. Is the best process for folks to contact 311, as you were talking about, for recording code issues, or is there another way that we should handle that?
Yeah, so just to be clear, as of Saturday the 7th, all common areas in all buildings, residential, commercial, retail, any indoor space where people who are not of the same household can have access to it, need face covering. And so that's a county health department requirement. Enforcement is challenging. So the chat had a question. Someone said the signs are up. That means property management's familiar with the requirement. The first recommendation for that is to contact property management and to work with property management how to improve communication. It's not something that's easily enforced. If a tenant feels that their property management is not putting up signage or not communicating, a contact to the Department of Housing and Community Affairs. We are the enforcement of residential property issues, including the requirements of face coverings. Our inspectors have relationships with most major properties, and will contact every property if there's a complaint, and we'll start working with the landlord and property management on their practices, what they know about the requirement, and share thoughts. But it's a difficult issue to enforce. The suggestion is to try and encourage your neighbors, but it's very, very challenging. It's a contentious issue in so many places. Your face covering protects you. So others not wearing face covering is, the health guidance is, everyone should. But the number one is that anyone that's personally concerned should manage and maintain their own face covering. But it is a requirement. You can, if you believe that your landlord and your property management are not providing appropriate notice and encouragement or communication, the county will talk with them, and we'll try and find and share information about best practices or other things. And we do have, for landlords, posters, notices that they can print and put up, but it's a very tricky issue.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for that. Another question, which is a two-parter, I think for Frank and for Rosie, although Amanda may have some thoughts here as well. The question is, do you foresee any changes to the current amount being given for rental relief, the $12,000, given how the pandemic is still ongoing and changing? That's one part of the question. If we foresee any changes to our current program of rent relief. And then the second question, Rosie, is there any help for tenants whose landlords are unwilling to wait for the approval of rent relief. And I'm not sure if this is referring to a scenario where, as Amanda was mentioning, between that 7-day business window, or just unwilling to wait and trying to force a tenant out. Do tenants have any other legal recourse in the case of a landlord that's unwilling to wait?
The landlord has a choice. He can wait for the money, or he can go through the process of having you evicted, but you cannot be evicted without a court order. You just can't. He has to go through the process of taking you to court, having the court issue a warrant of restitution, and have an eviction scheduled and have the sheriff show up. So we cannot force them to, but most landlords want the money. And they know that that's their pretty much only way to get that big chunk of money. So most landlords will wait, but we cannot force a landlord to take the money if he doesn't want to.
And in that case, I imagine the tenant would have to avail themselves of some of the other legal resources that you were talking about available at the court during the eviction proceeding. Thanks for that. And then to the question of whether or not we foresee changes, Amanda, I assume you might want to take that. That's why you pop back up.
Sure. And just to respond to that question too. So if we know that an eviction is scheduled or it's pending, we're in very close communication with the sheriff's office, and we can let them know we've got a check in hand. And we also do have the ability to print checks on demand. We can't do that for everyone because it's just too many, but in the event that you come to us and we know that, it's going to happen, it really is imminent, like happening in the next day or so, we can actually get that check cut right away so that you have it in hand. As far as the cap, so what I will say about this is that if you are at or below 30% AMI, there is additional assistance that may be available. So the $12,000 is a general cap, typically for households that are between 31 and 50% AMI. I will say that 70% of our applicants are below 30% AMI. So we are actually providing for many households more than $12,000 in assistance. Now there is a cap. Treasury does have a cap on the number of months of arrears that you can pay. So we are only allowed to pay 12 months of arrears. So if you are in a situation where you stopped paying in April of 2020, right after the pandemic, and have not paid, we can't pay off the entire balance because of those limitations from Treasury. But we can get you close. And in those situations, we are working with the landlords as well to forgive a portion of the rent because we want to make sure that the money stretches as far as it can and that we can serve more households.
And one more thing I wanted to say, if you're getting ready to be evicted and you have the money, Amanda's printed you a check and you have the money in your hand, the landlord does have to take it. If you have the money in your hand to pay off whatever is on that warrant of restitution, the landlord does have to take that.
Important point. That's an important point. Thanks so much. To the three of you and to everyone for all of your great questions. Sorry, there's one more really good question. A night of good questions. So a question here about how one can obtain a copy of the landlord's notice of the tenant's approval for the sort of similar to what we were talking about, I suppose, that you have the check in hand. I believe this person, speaking from their experiences, their landlord sent them a balance due letter, and they're trying to figure out how to connect up the difference, I suppose. In that situation, I imagine you should probably start by communicating with your landlord that you have access to the resources. But I don't know if there's something else we should tell them.
Yeah, that's a good question. I have to admit, I don't know the answer to that. Assuming that we provide notification, I know we provide notification to the landlord and to the tenant. I would assume that you could provide, your notification of approval to your landlord. But I'll have to go back and talk to my team to understand how that's actually playing out and the mechanics of it.
Okay. All right. Well, AL, I hope I pronounced your name right. You asked a good question, so I'm gonna go back and get that. But good to know that sort of there's two legs of the notification. So even if you don't have your landlord's notification, you have your notification that you should hold on to and be ready to present. So lots of great information here. Hope folks have been able to grab the links from the chat. Again, if you hopefully are on the Renters Alliance list, we're pumping this information out all the time. And of course, you can go to the county's website again on that renter page. It occurs to me, as we talked about, the sort of top line points that we want to leave you with, which are the ones that we talk about all the time. Certainly, if you get summoned to court, got to go to court, because that's where you can enforce your rights, and knowing your rights is so important. And so whether it's working with the Renters Alliance, you can feel free to reach out to us, and we can help guide you to information, connect you up with folks. Talking to people at HHS or DHCA, landlord tenant, legal aid. There's tons of information out there. And as was mentioned, there are now tons, even more legal resources for folks at the court. And so, we don't want you to be in an information desert. And so, please reach out to any and all of those levels, frankly, to get hooked up with information and resources. As Rosa said, only court can evict a tenant. And so make sure you're paying attention to those lessons she told you about what happens if your landlord attempts to evict you without a court order. Thanks, Amanda and Frank talking about how all the levels of application and protections and how to apply. And lastly, as we always encourage people to do, you should be communicating with your landlord, particularly if you're finding yourself or think you're about to find yourself going through some troubles with the ability to pay, or if you're back in your arrearages, even definitely trying to have open lines of communication with your landlord is key to this mix of aid and information, all designed to keep you out of eviction court and keep you in your home if we can. Definitely want to keep you out of the pipeline, and definitely want to keep you in your home. So with that, Frank, Rosie, Amanda, I don't know if you have any final thoughts there.
I just want to pick up a couple of threads from a couple of the questions or chat. We haven't been clear enough that the protections and a lot of the requirements that we're talking about support apply particularly to failure to pay rent. If you're a tenant and your landlord determines not to renew your lease and simply gives you notice, they have to give you 60 days notice that they're not renewing your lease and they're telling you to vacate the property. They can do that without cause, without any reason at all. And the protections available from the federal CDC order do not apply in that situation, nor would any protection from the governor's order. So the rental assistance can be available, but the landlord is not, in that case, evicting you for back rent. They're simply saying they have a right to not rent to you, and they're giving you that notice. If you do not leave, they will take it to court and they will work with the judge to schedule an eviction. You will have legal representation. You do have some rights, and there are technical issues they have to follow, so there can be some protections. If the rental assistance is in process, it might be something you can have to negotiate with them and work with them. But that's a significant risk, because evictions do happen based on failure, based on tenant holding over or breach of lease cases, where the landlord makes a case that your behavior or something you've done in the property breaches the lease. So just wanted to close with that as an outstanding issue. And the other thing I see is just the question on other assistance, that there are people who would not be eligible for the renter relief, COVID rent relief. The county does have resources. If you are facing loss of your housing and you've not received rental assistance, or you don't have a way to satisfy your landlord, and you are facing the loss of any housing, to contact the county at 311 for housing stabilization, and the housing Health and Human Services teams will work with assisting families to relocate with assistance to help them not be put out on the street, but try and help a transition at least to some temporary housing, and there are resources to support that different from the back rent. So we try and ensure that we're available for any and all circumstances, and not necessarily can be, but the resources are available for vast majority of persons that are facing loss of housing.
Very important. Yeah, thanks for adding that for sure. Very important to understand the differences and the divergences there, and certainly as Chris Perry, my board colleague, will attest, the Renters Alliance has also been doing some work around a just cause eviction, which dovetails with what you mentioned, Frank, but I haven't been able to get that over the finish line yet. So
We've been trying for 3 years to get essentially something which denies THO, that limits THO. We call it just cause eviction. We've been up in front of the state legislature 3 times, along with Janelle Wilkins and Lon Stewart, and it hasn't done any good so far.
But we're going to keep pushing.
We are,
and need your energy for that as well. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you to Frank, Rosie, and Amanda. Thank you to Chris and Reese so much for your help this evening, and thank you to Councilmember Jawando for joining us and sharing that information. And thank you to all of you for joining, grabbing some information that we hope can be helpful to you, and please pass it on so that it can be helpful to someone else, so that we can get folks into these programs, as folks said, get this money out the door and keep you in your homes. So with that, want to wish you all a good and safe evening, and hope to see you next time.